study out of the book of James. We're going into chapter 5 now. And we will be reading from chapter 5, verses 1 through 12. So I'd ask that all of you to please stand in reverence to God's word. I will be reading from the New International Version. Once again, James chapter 5, verses 1 through 12. Now listen, you rich people. Weep and wail because of the misery that is coming upon you. Your wealth is rotted and moths have eaten your clothes. Your gold and silver are corroded. Their corrosion will testify against you and eat your flesh like fire. You have hoarded wealth in the last days. Look, the wages you failed to pay the workmen who mow your fields and carry out are crying out against you. The cries of the harvest have reached the ears of the Lord Almighty. You have lived on earth in luxury and self-indulgence. You have fattened yourselves in the day of slaughter. You have condemned and murdered innocent men who were not opposing you. Be patient then, brothers, until the Lord's coming. See how the farmer waits for the land to yield its vulnerable crop, and how patient he is for the autumn and the spring rains. You too, be patient and stand firm, because the Lord is coming, for the Lord's coming is near. Don't grumble against each other of your brothers, for you will be judged. The judge is standing at the door. Brothers, as an example of patience in the face of suffering, take the prophet who spoke in the name of the Lord. As you know, we consider blessed those who have persevered. You have heard of Job's perseverance, and you have seen what the Lord finally brought about. The Lord is full of compassion and mercy. Above all, my brothers, do not swear, not by heaven or by earth or by anything else. Let your yes be your yes, and let your no, no, or you will be condemned. May the Lord add a blessing to the reading and hearing of his word. One thing about James, he liked to take a lot of information and put it in small sections. There's a lot that James is talking about in this passage of text. But mainly it's about setting an example. And this is also a passage of text which can really be misused. Let's look at the beginning. In the beginning, he starts out and it is basically a condemnation of the wealthy. And while that is exactly what is happening, what James is speaking to in a greater sense is power. He's speaking to power. And there will be people who will stand in pulpits and use that text to basically condemn wealth. Now, are there wealthy people who are bad people? Yes. Are there wealthy people who misuse their wealth? Yes. And because of what wealth can do, it is further elevated because of the influence and the power that wealth, especially in the Western world, brings to you. But more importantly, what we have to look at is how do we as Christians use our power? How do we use our authority? Now, some of you may be sitting there thinking, well, I don't have any of that. Well, yes, you do. All of us at some point in our lives have a point when we have power or authority over someone else. Whether it is just our children, whether it is we are a manager, whether it's that we own a business, at some point, our actions affect others because of the power, influence, authority that we have over other people. And what James is saying is be careful how you use that. And he's using the wealthy or the rich as an example. And one thing that we have to point out again is James is writing this letter to fellow Christians. So he's saying to these fellow Christians who are wealthy, look, you're messing up. We have a problem problem. We have an issue here with the way you are doing things. You are not treating your fellow brothers and sisters fairly. You are not paying them fairly. You are hoarding all of this wealth. You are trying to live comfortably on earth today and not thinking about what is to come. And it's the same with whatever influence or power that you have. Some of you are managers of other people. Many of you are parents. Do we use our power? Do we use our influence? Do we use our authority in a Christian way? And that's the question. Because if we're not, then we are not setting the proper example. If a Christian is a business owner, are you paying your employees a fair wage? Not the wage that the government says is fair. But when you're looking at what they're doing for you, when you're looking at what they are providing, are you paying them a fair wage? Are you being fair to them? If you stand in a position of authority such as a teacher, do you use that authority? Do you use that influence? Do you use that power in a way that is representative of what a servant of God should do? Or do you use it unfairly? I remember back when I was a teacher, one of the teachers who also taught economics and government and history with me had an issue with a student's parent. And this issue went back years. It went back to when they were teenagers. And because of that issue that he had with the parent, he did not treat the child fairly. And this individual said that they were a believer. They said that they were a Christian. That is not how we are supposed to use our power. That is not how we're supposed to use our authority. And so that's what James is saying to us. That is the message, the main message that he's delivering in that first section of Scripture where he's talking about the wealthy. And yes, there are wealthy that have some issues. But you can be a person that does not have a lot of means, but there's still some influence that you have. There's still some authority that you have. Are you using that properly? As a head of a household, as a husband, are you using the authority that has been given to you as head of household properly? That's something that you have to focus on, concentrate on, and pray on. So the first issue that James wants us to address in terms of setting the example is, are we using our power, our authority properly? Are we using it in a good way? Are we showing mercy? Are we showing love? Are we showing kindness? Are we living by the example that Jesus set? We never see, when we look at the life of Jesus, we never see him misusing the authority or the power that he had. When he rode into Jerusalem on that Palm Sunday morning, at a word, he could have looked at that crowd and he could have said, we're taking back Jerusalem from the Romans, and I want you to storm the Roman citadel. And they would have done it because of who they thought the Messiah was supposed to be. But he didn't misuse that power. He didn't misuse that authority. The next characteristic that James wants us to understand is the characteristics of perseverance. Perseverance. Are we sticking to our guns, or do we just look at life and say, I give up. I can't take it anymore. I can't do it anymore. Difficult times will come, and the longer we live, the more difficult times that we face. We will face loss in our lives. We will face times when we are disappointed by people whom we care about. We will face times when we feel like we have been abandoned. But what James is saying is, look at the people who persevered, and he turns to Job, and he talks about how even with all that Job went through, Job never turned his back on God. He persevered. He stuck with it. This is someone who was the richest man in the land, and he was the most prosperous man in the land, and he was one of the most blessed men in the land, and he lost it all, including his health, but never did he turn from God. He continued to persevere. That's what James is trying to tell us. He's trying to say, look, just because you've given your life to Christ doesn't mean that from now on it's going to be like you're running through a field of rose petals and the sun is always shining and it's always bright and there are no storms in your life. If anyone is preaching that doctrine, they are preaching a false doctrine. That is my biggest problem today with the prosperity gospel. It's talking about give all of these things to God and do this and do that, and then God is going to give you all of this wonderful prosperity. I don't read that in my Bible. If that's the case, then anybody who dies poor must be doing something wrong. That's not true. With life comes challenges, with life comes difficulty, with life comes hard times, but if we persevere, don't turn from God. That isn't when we should be running in the opposite direction. That is when we should be turning to God and saying, God, I need your help. Help me through this difficulty. That so many times I've seen people that there's been a loss or there's been something extremely tragic that has taken place in their life, and they say, there can't be a God. There's no way that God could allow something like that to happen. Here's what we have to understand about the world. And it's difficult to understand. But from the moment that we are born into this world, from the moment you get that first swat and you cry out, we are born into a world of sin. And because of that, sin breeds difficulty. Sin breeds hard. It's not God's fault, but he will see you through those difficulties, just like he saw Job. Now, the thing that I caution people about the book of Job is that they go to the end and they say, okay, well, yeah, Job got back double what he lost. God gave him double the camels and double the sheep and double the children. And so if I just do this and I persevere, then God's going to give me double too. That's not what he said either. What he did say is that he will be with us. We just need to persevere. So, characteristics of setting that example: we need to use our power properly. We need to be persevere. We need to persevere. We cannot give up. Remember, again, people are watching. Those who do not know God, they are watching. And when they see that Christian that is going through those difficult and hard times and they persevere, there's something often within them that says, how is it that you can do this? How is it that you can withstand this? And you can explain, I'm not doing it on my own. It is not of my own power. It is not of my own strength. So he wants us to persevere. The next thing that Job talks about is we need to be honest. You think that was a simple one. He says, don't swear by heaven, don't swear by earth. Let your yes be your yes. Let your no be your no. And because of that, there are denominations today that when they go into a courtroom, they will not put their hand on the Bible and say, I swear to tell the truth. They will say, I affirm to tell the truth. Why? Because your yes is your yes, your no is your no. In other words, if nothing else, a person who knows that you are a Christian should be able to say that that is an individual of integrity. That is someone that can be trusted. When they say something, I know that it is the truth. I know that it is right. Let your yes be your yes. Let your no be your no. You don't have to throw anything. Oh, well, you know what? I swear on heaven on high, I'm telling you the truth. You shouldn't have to do that, especially with people who know you, because you just say it, hey, that's the way it is. That was one of the things that I really admired about my dad. Now, granted, a lot of times his yeses weren't yeses I wanted, And a lot of times his no's weren't no's I wanted to hear, but I knew when he said something that that was the way that it was going to be. He very seldom made promises. He very seldom would say, well, I promise you I'm going to do this. He would just say, I'm going to do this. And if he thought it was a chance he wouldn't be able to do something, he'd say, well, I'm going to try my best to do this. And okay, if it didn't happen, he tried his best. And that's the way that we have to be as Christians. Our yeses have to be our yeses, our no's have to be our no's. It goes back to that use of power that we talked about earlier. People need to know that they can trust us. The book of Peter says that we will be a peculiar people. It's something different. People should sense. I don't quite know what it is, but there's definitely something different there. So we should be honest. Use our power correctly, be honest, persevere. The last thing that James talks about is patience. And I have to admit to you, as I read and James is talking about patience, I had to laugh because he uses as an example farmers. And he says, look at how the farmer plants and he waits for the spring rains and the fall rains. And me, you just have to understand how my mind works sometimes. I said, well, duh, like he has a choice. It isn't like he can speed it up. I mean, he's not God. It comes or it doesn't. It happens or it doesn't. So I just found that to be an interesting example of patience. I don't know whether that's patience or more faith. Lord, please let it rain. But we as Christians have to be patient. Understand this. Even if God has promised you something, let's say you say, I know that this is what God has called me to do, and he's made his promise, but we have to be patient because sometimes we try to help God. And when we try to help God, you know what we end up with? We end up with an Ishmael. That's what happened with Abraham. God said, okay, you know what? I promise you a son. And Sarah's over there, and she says, okay, well, you know what? God promised Abraham a son, and I'm too old. God's not going to be able to give this son to me, and we've waited so long for this son. So I tell you what, we've got this law within our community that I can give my handmaiden to my husband, and I can have children through her. And so we know, many of us know how the story goes, that Sarah gives her handmaiden Hagar to Abraham, and they do indeed have a son, and that son's name is Ishmael. Then God comes back and says, see, there you go rushing things. No, Ishmael is not the son of the promise. I will give you a son, and I will give you a son through your wife Sarah. And the Bible tells us when Sarah heard that, she laughed. Like, I don't know what Sarah he's talking about, but it's not me. But we know what happens. God fulfills his promise. He gives Abraham the son. But what happens because of that? Now you have conflict between the oldest son, which is not the son of the mother, and the youngest son, which is the son that God had promised. And to show you how far that goes, those two brothers, they fought each other. And when we look at what is happening in the Middle East today, they're still fighting. Their descendants are still fighting each other. That is what happens when we try and rush God. When God has made promises, the one thing that we can take to the bank is that God always, not most of the time, not some of the time, but God always keeps his promises. But we have to be patient. The main promise that we as Christians lean on is that Jesus Christ has promised us that he will return. And there is an industry in the Christian community that revolves around trying to figure out when that's going to be. It's none of our business when it is going to be. It's going to be when God is ready. What our job is as Christians is to make sure that when he's ready, we're ready. God will return someday. It may be in our lifetimes. It may be in our great-great-great-grandchildren's lifetimes, but he will return. We have to be patient. He promised the nation of Israel, I will bring you out of slavery. 700 years they were in slavery. 700 years, they're like, hey, God, you know, you promised you will get us out of slavery. He did make that promise, and he kept it. He promised them that he would lead them into the promised land. Now, they had to wander in the wilderness for 40 years, not God's fault, theirs, but he still kept his promise. We as his children, we as his followers, have to have patience. When we're dealing with God, we are not dealing with the drive-thru window at McDonald's. It's not like Burger King. You can't have it your way. God does it his way and in his time. We just have to be patient. My wife will tell you that she was kind of different growing up. And I can believe that. I didn't know her then. But she said there were two things when other people would talk about what they wanted to do in life. There were two things that she would talk about. She said, I want to be two things. I want to be a wife, and I want to be a mother. And we honestly felt that was God's intention. She wanted to be a wife, she wanted to be a mother. I wanted to be a dad, I wanted to be a husband, I want a whole lot of other things too. But, you know, I was a guy. You know, we don't necessarily think the same way. I wanted to be a dad. I also wanted to be a star football player, but, you know, that one didn't happen. But we had to be patient. And we were patient to the point where we eventually said, the whole parent thing, not going to happen. You know, it's just God's will. We'll just have a whole bunch of godchildren. And then next thing you know, one day we're getting a phone call. Next thing you know, one day we're waking up in the middle of the night because there's a little boy who's up who we really wish would go to sleep. But it's a blessing. God does things in his time. And his time is the right time, not our time. So we have to be patient. So when we're looking out and we're saying, well, God, what type of example should we set? James is telling us in his word, first of all, he's saying, you have power, you have authority at some point over someone else. Use that in a godly way. Don't use it in the way that the world says that you should use it. Use it in the way that God would have you to use it. Use your power correctly. God is saying hard times will come. Difficult times will come. Don't give up. Don't give in. Persevere. Stand with me. I am with you always, even to the end of the age. God is saying, be honest. Let your yes be your yes. Let your no be your no. You don't have to swear on mom's life. You don't have to swear on heaven. You don't have to swear on a stack of Bibles. Just let your yes be your yes and your no be your no. And then he's saying, I have made promises to you. I will keep those promises. Just be patient. That is the example that God is asking us to set. Our ancestors had to be patient, and the nation of Israel was promised a Messiah. And they waited on this Messiah. And they got impatient at times, so every once in a while they would lift up a false Messiah. But eventually that Messiah, in the name of Jesus, he did come. And that the promise was that this Messiah will offer salvation to the entire world. Now again, they mistook that. They thought that that meant that they were going to get their swords and their shields and their armor, and they were going to kick the Romans out of Israel, but that isn't what our Messiah did. Our Messiah did something so much more important. Because remember, I said, from the moment that each of us is born, when we come into this world, when the doctor pats us on our little bottoms and we cry out, we are born into a world of sin. But for Jesus Christ, we are offered an opportunity for salvation from that sin. God has said there is a price that has to be paid, but I love you so much that I am willing to pay that price for you. Yes, there must be justice. Yes, there must be judgment, but I am willing to take all of that onto me, and all you have to do is accept the gift that I've given you. The fact that I hung on that cross, that I bled, and that I died, and that I rose 3 days later, just accept that. Accept it. Believe it, and in that you can find your salvation.